low productivity, the government needs to declare a state of emergency.
I'm a true obedience.
The problem is always continuity.
Of course, our productivity level is really low.
That we're entitled to our lives.
So we might put a lot of money into education, but we're learning carpentry skill.
Compared to the global average of about 12,000 plus, that's 6 times lesser.
We have spoken clearly.
I believe that there are certain foundational things that need to be fixed.
We're not ready for the real conversation.
So, but people must eat, right?
Subsidy is gone. An average Nigerian, you must question it if you truly love Nigeria.
Nigeria is currently experiencing its worst economic crisis, leading to widespread hardship and anger. A litre of petrol now costs more than 7 times what it did 10 years ago, while the cost of rice has more than doubled in the past year.
It's affecting all the sectors of our business.
Our producing power as a nation has not really increased. So most of the things we sell in Nigeria are imported.
What we are currently witnessing is a country with a rising cost of living and a lower standard of living crisis. At the heart of these issues plaguing the country is an elephant in the room, our productivity issue. Nigeria is a country currently suffering from low productivity. We consume more than we produce. Our manufacturing and service-based industries are operating at a subpar level when compared to their counterparts in Asia and other African countries. What do we mean when we say that Nigeria is suffering from low productivity? Now, let's create some context to that statement. Our productivity is a measure of output relative to input. And the most common measure of productivity is the gross domestic product per capita, otherwise known as the economic output of a nation per person. The per capita income is the amount of money earned per person in a nation, and this is used to determine a population's standard of living and quality of life. This begs the question of how Nigeria's economic output per person can be over $2,000 when over 40% of its population are currently living below the poverty line of $1 per day. Tagging Nigeria as an unproductive nation suggests that not many people are working in ways that contribute to the economy effectively. And in the same light, the country is not making vital use of its land, mineral, and resources to its fullest potential. As a result, Nigeria is not growing economically as it could, leading to issues such as poverty, unemployment, and a lower standard of living for its citizens. So where did we get it wrong as a nation? Welcome to Beyond Political Lines, a brand new show by Mandy 4, where we hold constructive conversations across partisan socioeconomic divide lines, focusing on citizens' engagement and practical solutions. I am your host, Uwana Johnson. Today, we're diving into a critical issue facing Nigeria, which is our nation's productivity crisis. To discuss these challenges and potential solutions, I am joined by representatives across different party lines. Chidinma Obianador from Labour Party, Femi Obidare, a non-partisan, and Olufemi Ibitoye, a representative from the All Progressive Congress. We'll be starting today's episode with a fundamental question. Do you believe that Nigeria's low productivity issue is a critical problem that needs immediate attention? Now let's get into today's episode.
Of course, I think it is. I mean, at a GDP per capita of about 2,100 and something after that, compared to the global average of about 12,000 plus, that's 6 times lesser, approximately, of what's the global average. Of course, our productivity level is really low, and it is a major concern for us, for anyone in the helm of affairs or in any sector that work within the country. So I agree with that totally. It is a major concern for us.
Thank you very much, Femi. How about you, Mr. Chidinma?
Okay, well, just like Femi have said, it's no brainer that, in fact, we need to declare a state of emergency. Because if you looked at it, for an average Nigerian, even the economic power has actually reduced vis-a-vis insecurity. And if you look at the headline inflation and food inflation, it has been the highest in the history of Nigeria. So, of course, so there's a need for us to not just to be worried, but then low productivity, the government needs to declare a state of emergency and, of course, have a proactive measures so as to curb this growing inflation.
Okay, thank you. And would you say we currently have enough political will to address these challenges?
Okay, so political will is always the subject of major discourse, because for Nigeria, over time, we've always have what we call political instability, because you see different government with different policies, with different agenda, the 5-point agenda, the 8-point agenda, and there's no continuity in government. So the political will, and for an average civil servant, they are just there to implement whatever the will of, the agenda of the executive arm of the government. So the problem is always continuity. So if a government says, okay, my focus to drive the economy, to drive the GDP of Nigeria is, let's say, oil and gas, or let's say solid mineral, any government could say, no, I'm focusing on agri. So the problem has always been the continuity. So until we have what we call corporate vision as a nation, whereby regardless of your party affiliation, regardless of your vision for Nigeria, there's always the corporate vision which you must all plug into, then we are not ready for the real conversation.
I think I'll jump in on political will matter.
Okay.
So one of the very first places you go to when you're considering political will is the national budget, right? Because that's about the most singular, most important document that demonstrates what a government's focus or strategic or political focus really is on, or policy focus really is on. And if you look at our current national budget at 2024, what we have allotted to education is just a little above 6%, 6.9%, almost 7% now, if I'm correct. Yeah, true. That's what it is. And which is still way, way lower than the recommended UNESCO average, which is supposed to be between 15 to 20%. Well, looking at it, because answering that question of whether the government has sufficient political will or not, in terms of spending, right, the spending cost actually is higher than what the 2023 budget had in it, right? But in terms of percentage, it is still lower, quote unquote. Because 2023 budget, the spending allocated was 8.8% thereabout. So generally, you can see that you can measure a form of commitment. You can identify some measure of commitment on the part of the present administration to at least do a little more than it was in the previous administration, because more resources was allotted in actual terms of spending,
numbers.
To education, right? But it's still way lower, right? Compared. And why do I talk about education? Because we understand that education is the cornerstone of productivity. That's the truth. And if there is no adequate demonstration of a commitment to drive radical change in that sector, then you can begin to question the extent to which the administration has sufficient political will.
Well, I think I can speak to that a bit. So for the first time, we have a senior special advisor to the assistant to the president on technical and vocational education.
Correct.
And I mean, you can see she's doing fantastic things. And I think that is a demonstration of the will. I agree with Mr. Femi, who says that we need a corporate vision. So maybe it's a lack of strategy. Maybe that's what the problem is in that situation. Because I believe the corporate vision should actually drive the budget and not the other way around. So if we have this, where are we going as a nation? Are we trying to be, I've heard people bandy around the words, we want to be the gas hub of Africa, but we are not. Our budget doesn't reflect that. So we might put a lot of money into education, but we're learning carpentry skills. That's not in line with our corporate vision. So I guess, yes, we first need a corporate vision for the country. And then we need to align our budget to that. Then our education, because you can spend 5% of your budget training the best gas technicians in the world, and then you would have alignments, and you'd be able to achieve that vision. And I guess some countries have done that.
Okay, that's very interesting. So just to recap on the little conversation that we've just had, Mr. Femi. Olufemi.
Olufemi, then Femi.
So Mr. Olufemi believes that we have that sufficient political will in the current government.
No, don't get it wrong. What I've just done is the root cause analysis. Because yes, you can't talk about political will where there is no corporate vision to drive it. There must be an existing something to build upon before you can begin to talk about political will. When you know that there's an average standard, there's a minimum standard which you must follow. When you know that this is what you must do, then you must, as a politician, let me put it that way, because those are the ones driving all this engagement, both in the executive arm and the legislative arm. So you first of all know that, yes, if you don't do this, the people will ask you question when you're coming to seek for their vote. So then we cannot begin to look at the numbers. So, but then, just like he said, the numbers, based on percentage, there of course, it's lower, but the numbers has increased. But then, there must be something to build on before we can talk about the political will. The political will, maybe it's not really there, because when you look at the things we spend most of our money on, then we begin to question the political will of our leaders, that do you really want this country to go? Then what are the things? Because if you look at some of the line items in the budget, an average Nigerian, you must question it if you truly love Nigeria.
Yeah. I think adding to that as well, because again, talking about your spending is actually what shows your commitment ultimately, and that's really established. Like Olufemi said, generally, one of the things that would show, that would demonstrate political will, just as Chidima had mentioned, that yes, you can tell that there's a measure of motion in that direction of wanting to tilt the scale, okay, or shift the needle at least. But the modeling by leaders has a lot of role to play in this. Yeah. So if the spending by those in executive and the legislative does not demonstrate that there is a general desire to make the necessary sacrifices that we need to make in this country as a whole, then you really wonder how well the political will is grounded. You understand it? Yeah, that's that.
Okay, I definitely agree with that viewpoint. Moving on to our next question, I just realized that we missed a section of our introduction, which is regards to the parties that we
political
support.
affiliation.
Yes, because the next question sort of ties into what policies or initiatives do you think your party or the party you support has done to elevate or enhance the level of productivity in Nigeria across, the last couple of decades. Right. So maybe we go back to the introduction, just say a bit about, the parties that we support, and then what sort of policies or initiatives that they have put in place, which has to an extent elevated our productivity level.
So this is easy for me. I'm non-partisan.
You should go next.
Okay. Yeah, go on.
I'm non-partisan, right? Okay. So I'll let the political...
then we'll come back to you for
exactly,
an objective.
And then, of course, something quite balanced.
All right, go next.
But then, not being partisan doesn't mean you don't vote during election. Then you must have a reason why you vote. If you're voting for a particular candidate or particular party, then you are voting based on their policy. So let us know so that we know. Okay, in the last election,
he legally can't.
Let me put it this way.
So that the conversation can be interesting. Of course, I'm not putting you on the spot. It's fine if you want. You can pass.
I'm very well comfortable with being on the spot. Actually,
okay, it's fine then.
So the thing is this. So I'm actually one of those persons looking forward to the time in Nigeria where we will be able to have candidates without any particular party affiliation run for elections. It happens in a lot of countries outside Nigeria. Of course.
How effective though?
I mean, it can be effective. It's really a function of our context. I understand that our context currently doesn't seem to support that, right? But I'm personally looking forward to... I'm like that with a lot of things. Even when it comes to football, I'm not so much into a club, but I support good football.
That means support Chelsea.
So what what it means for me is that if tomorrow the candidate that a PDP fields, right, is someone that in a sense has demonstrated sufficient integrity and accountability and enough interest in the people as received and has a solid track record, I would vote for him. So that's my position on that. Anyway, so we get
let me chip in something. Let me chip in something. When you talk about political party, political party always have political vision. Even if they don't really stick to it, when you go to their website, they tell you, okay, this is what we are, this is how you understand. So there is no way you can separate a candidate from his or her party. Yes, some candidate will tell you this is me, but then you cannot always, because when it comes to implementation, you need your party structure. There are some of the people you put in there, so they must also buy into it. So let me go into the question. I think she wants to pass for now. So
I'm not passing. I'm waiting.
You're waiting for you to talk about your affiliation, and then she talks about hers. Yes.
Okay. So of course, I have strong attachment to Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So it was no brainer me supporting him in the last 2023 general election, because if you looked at it, it's a man that he has demonstrated capacity over the years when he has served. Even when he served as the governor of Lagos State, we know how infrastructural development, increase the IGR, and we can see that Lagos State is the bride of all other states here in Nigeria today. So, and And if you looked at the last 1 year, yes, the truth is it has not been rosy because during his inauguration, there was one major announcement which, of course, changed the dynamics of the economy, which was what subsidy is gone. And of course, if you looked at it, it is not sustainable. And if we really want to have this frank conversation, the subsidy regime, the subsidy era is through in secrecy, corruption. You see people with no productivity, adding no value to the economy, but they reap from this subsidy regime. So subsidy going, it's a plus because then if you looked at it, two policies, like I said, then unification of the forex. Now let's talk about the subsidy regime and what we have now. Now we have enough funds to be divided into, let's say, the health sector, education and infrastructure. So we could see one or two from the Lagos, Calabar Coastal Highway, the railway, the Port Harcourt, Lagos Railway, and the Abuja, So these are infrastructures that will help economic development. We're talking about productivity. If you looked at it, part of the problem we're having now, and which will take me to the next thing, we're talking about policies. So I've talked about two policies now, which will take me to the next policy, which is agriculture. We're talking about inflation, which is over 40%. Food inflation in Nigeria, we're having it so bad. And I remember some months ago, the president declared state of emergency in agriculture, where this agricultural development fund, there was an influx of 100 billion. We saw the release of 42,000 metric tons of grains. Yes, they are doing these things, but then we still want more to be done. And I will tell you from a position of privilege, because the essay to the president on agri happens to be my own brother. So I know some of the things that are coming up from that minister, even from his own office. So there's a program we call the Green Money Project. The Green Money Project is youth-centric, is youth-focused, whereby we've got international organizations ready to support us. So what we are looking at is a whole value chain. So we're looking at, let's say, we're looking at Southwest as a region. We want to focus on cocoa and cassava. So we are looking at the total value chain. So not just the farmers, we're looking at those who will train them. We're talking about off-takers. We are talking about agro-allied products. First thing first, we need to be sustainable. Let us eat. Let us have enough. Then we can now begin to look at how do we make it. Don't forget, there's something which is the focus of this administration, export-oriented industrialization. Whatever you're doing must be export-oriented. We must be able to say, okay, our cassava and the processing and different produce we can get from our cassava must be exportable. What we've been having over years, look at, we've always been having issues with our yam. It is because we don't process them adequately. And also, I will tell us about this initiative, the Single Window Project, which I also have adequate knowledge about. The Single Window Project is aimed to at least bring in close to $2.7 billion US. So it is to simplify processes. Why I have to make mention of it now is that I talked about the yam. Now, at the port of exportation, we have so many agencies of government holding you just because you want to export this bottle of water. So there's a need we need to simplify. And if you look at nations all over the world that have implemented this Single Window Project, and you can see the way it has boosted their economy. So these are some of the policies that this government is putting in place. If you look at under Ministry of Trade and Investment, we have the conditional cash transfer of the 25,000 for 6 months. We have the one of the 50,000 for small businesses. We also have this national skill training. There's a program whereby there's going to be an exchange program. Sorry? Super. Yeah, is NAPTEP? NAPTEP, yeah, thank you. It's actually NAPTEP. So whereby talent, during the campaign of His Excellency Governor Opus Odima, he made mention of it. People started joking, but then it's real because then we have talent here in Nigeria. So we can export this talent. You don't have to leave Nigeria because the world is a global village. We all know how jobs are being opened out there. So some of these policies are aimed to increase productivity, and of course, the most important demography of our nation. I think I'm beginning to talk too much, which is the youth. So then I think I will use the mic for now because there are a whole lot of policies of the 8-point agenda of this administration that what we just need is more political will. Then we, the citizen, we also need to support, because sometimes when we hear about this policy, in the last 2 years, I've now realized that there are a lot of policies of government that they are existing, people are benefiting, but an average Nigerian does not believe it exists. So when you tell them about it, they're like, if you don't know, which is not always like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olufemi. Now over to you, Ms. Chiduman. Let's get your 2 cents on this.
I was smiling the entire time you were speaking. One thing about an APC supporter is that they're going to talk.
Well, you talk because there's something to say, right?
Yes. And I appreciate, because I don't know about a lot of these policies, and it's the first time I've heard of a lot of them. So I'm looking forward to partaking in some of these policies. So while I support the APC government to succeed, because the success of this government is the success of all of us, really, I'm a true obedient in the heart and the spirit of the obedience movement.
That's beautiful.
The obedience movement transcends political parties, if we're honest. You have people who... the Labour Party was a platform because, like you say, there are no independent candidates.
Yeah.
And what we really stood for was for the values that the obedience want to see demonstrated. And I know that one of the major taglines was from consumption to production.
Yeah.
So I guess as a true obedience, we can speak to this topic on productivity. Again, I mean, as on the national level, the Labour Party cannot speak because the APC has been in government for the last 9 years now. So we can't speak to that. But I can use Abia State as an example of where the Labour Party is in charge of affairs and is seen to be thriving. I believe that works speak for themselves. For the best intentions of this government, I believe that there are certain foundational things that need to be fixed in order for these policies to come to fruition. The APC has been in government for 9 years. We've seen billions and billions and billions go into agriculture. I'm speaking to the agricultural sector because you've spoken about that. And we haven't seen commensurate returns
productivity
in this sector in particular. And you might attribute that to things like security challenges, but I believe that you need to fix whatever the foundation is in order to get those returns. So maybe a call to action for the government would be to focus on some of these other foundational issues like education, like security, before pumping more into this sector. But people must eat, right? So let me go back to Abia State. I think that the man at the helm of affairs there is doing a good job. I think he's providing security, he's providing power, which is foundational, and he's also investing in education. And I think whatever policies that come on top of that would bear fruit because these are the foundations. So yeah, those are the initiatives that I think will enhance national productivity. Maybe this government should also invest more in education, power, security, and then some of these other things will come to fruition.
Okay. All right, I'll just jump right in. Yeah. So what I would say, standing in as a non-partisan person on this platform and just an observation of what's been going on and the direction and the focus of the current administration, what I would say, my assessment would be that there are early signs. For one, despite the fact that indeed the APC had been in power for about 9 years now, rather, the truth is that, of course, there was a change of guard just about a year ago, right? And already you could even tell if you assess BAT's administration and Buhari's administration, you can tell that there is a difference in the temperament of the leaders themselves, right? There's a difference in the focus of leaders themselves and the way they respond to action. One thing that's very clear, for example, is that Bad doesn't waste so much time in signing something into an activity. Sees it, he goes ahead. Buhari can still take his time a lot. I mean, President Buhari will take much more. It's his temperament, and that's the way he approaches things. So I would say, yes, there are early signs. I mean, my colleague here had mentioned a number of policies or initiatives. And of course, there's a clear gap. One of the major gaps just shows the fundamental problems we have in our policy process or policy cycle in the country. Yes, there are times where the government is pushing certain policies, but like you rightly said, sometimes Chidinma also sort of alluded to that. Citizens don't even really know how it's been implemented, what's going on, how it's even impacting their lives, right? So again, it just shows that there is there's a major gap in the policy cycle. One of the major gaps generally is that consultative process that's supposed to happen, right? And participation is supposed to happen in the entire policy process, which doesn't happen enough in this country. That's the first important thing to bear in mind. And the other thing I would say is that when you talk about productivity generally, right, there are certain pillars. Chidinma has said something about foundational issues, and I totally buy into that. Adding to that, there are certain pillars that support productivity generally. You want to talk about physical capital, you talk about technology, you talk about human capital, and then, of course, natural resources. Now, there has to be sufficient drive in each of those directions by any government and administration to ensure that productivity scales or improves or increases. Are we seeing enough of that at the moment? Really not, but I've not lost faith. Right, I still believe that in a matter of time, you can see a lot of different. One of the, for example, policies or strategies that catch my attention a lot is the 3MTT drive by the Minister for ICD, and that's major because it focuses on human capital dimension, also brings technology into it, and then people are being developed for the job of the future. Right, so that's one thing that has the potential to tip the scale or move the needle. But my ultimate challenge, and I'm going to stop it here, at the end of the day, really is the extent to which one of the issues that Olufemi mentioned, there can be continuity in some of these initiatives and some of these policies. So to wrap it up in that direction, yes, there's some early signs of deliberateness in shifting the needle at the national level. You can say that. But what is left to now know over time is, well, let's see how committed over the long haul the administration is, number one. Number two, let's see how much sacrifice the government of the day is also willing to make if the people are making sacrifices.
That's a topic for another.
That's a topic for
all right, that's it. I'll just stop it there.
Let me just come in as regards people not knowing. And if you look at this administration, the National Orientation Agency have what we call the Mobilizer app, just as a form of engagement. And over time, you looked at that agency, it's one of the most dormant agency, and this agency has offices in all local governments in Nigeria.
Agreed.
And it also has state offices. So, these are places where information needs to come out from. But of course, I think they now have what we call the mobilization app, which citizens can get engaged. Then, of course, the office of Haji Sabala Mohammed also have citizen engagement app where you can track policies of government. So, we as a citizen also, we need to also start asking the hard questions. Enough of all this. Well, whatever they like, they should do. I didn't vote for him, or me, I should. We need to have a bit of deliberateness. There are two ways which you can engage, and there is app. For those of us who are technologically inclined, there's the traditional media. So people should be getting the information now. So I believe this government is also trying to make sure that there is no gap between the policies they're making and how people receive these policies.
What role do you think the people, the youth, even Nigerians in the diaspora can play in, supporting the government in enhancing or elevating the level of our productivity?
I think the Nigerian youth are, in stark contrast to what we've been called in the past, some of the most hardworking people.
Agreed.
We're not lazy Nigerian youth. We're some of the most hardworking people, and Nigerians in general, because we go outside of Nigeria and we thrive, really. When you spoke about the app, the Mobilizer app, I've not heard of it yet, but I'm a little concerned when I see initiatives that arise almost spontaneously outside of the people you're trying to influence. So Nigerians already dominate spaces like Twitter and Instagram and all of these other, already existing social apps. Why do we need to create a new one and try and get the buy-in of 200 million people when you probably already have 100 million of us on all of these other apps? Why don't you try and why don't you invest your resources in controlling, not to sound very on influencing social behavior from all of these existing mediums. The point of it is that we need to create policies that work with the stakeholders, which are the youth.
Yeah.
So if you sit somewhere and create a policy and then come to present it to us, we have no ownership of it. And I'm saying us because I'm a youth with my full chest. But if you create policies and then you bring it to the youth, then, you know, we don't own that. We're not part of that policy. So that's when you get that, that's them and their cronies, or them and their people. So come down all the way. I like what the current Minister of Youth is doing. I've seen a lot of repeated calls to action by the youth ministry. Come get involved in this youth policy. You know, those sorts of things. Yeah. We should see more of that. And then maybe you'd see a lot more social, engagements. Yeah. That's the word.
Okay, so let me quickly come in there. Outside this room, the essay to the Minister of Aviation is out there. So why do I say that is most of these essays are on Twitter, on social media. But then let me tell you, the app, and I also fought them because I told the essay to the DG of National Orientation Agency, you are launching an app. I'm not supposed to say this, but then, of course, it's all in the interest of Nigeria, because I told her, I said, you are launching an app, and you are launching the app in Kano.
Kano has a massive population.
But then, not the upwardly mobile population. If you're launching an app, if you're not using Lagos, you're not using anywhere. Because that is where you will get the natural buzz you need. That's why you are not hearing about the app. So, the essence of the app is not just to have a one-off tweet. It's to have when you have the app, you know that anything you need to hear about the government, activities and whatever they're doing, just go on the app. You get it in the immediate. You understand? So it's easier. Of course, there are also other social engagement, on Twitter. They're out there churning out content. You see them every day. In fact, every week you see all ministries now, except those that are not performing. We can't hide from that. You see the performing ministries, they'll show out the activities of their minister every week, either as a montage, as pictures, or as a bulletin. So all these things, it is the strategy that is faulty.
I think that one very important point, putting it into a structural conversation or context now, one of the very important points that Chidima is making has to do with fiscal responsibility. And again, that ties a lot into productivity, because it's really about productivity in its simplest terms is a measure of output against input.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is, you're having more output that is quote unquote commensurate to the input you're making. Ideally, you're more productive when your outputs outstrips your input. If it is the same, there's not so much productivity. And if it is less than, then of course, you're completely at a loss. And the challenge really is that there is a need for adequate fiscal responsibility in our country. What it means, of course, is that sometimes we deploy certain initiatives that sort of show that the money could have been spent better. Really, if we're wise enough, or if we think enough to leverage existing platforms or existing structures, that we don't necessarily have to proliferate initiatives. We can go and really assess and make a lot of our assets, whether they are physical or otherwise, make those assets sweat, right? And lay a lot of emphasis on how we can derive more value from what already exists. So that's my take on the matter of, whether we want to deploy an app or not. But at the end of the day, first, that fiscal responsibility matters a lot, because what it therefore means is that I think the entire removal of subsidy itself was in the spirit of ensuring fiscal responsibility.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. So that we can't keep supporting what is not working or what has been proven to have been compromised by corruption. That was the spirit behind it, right? And it's good. But at the end of the day, the output is what really matters. The subsidy has gone, but hey, how are we feeling it? You understand the picture?
How are we navigating the musky waters?
That's what my take really be around that.
Thank you very much for that. At the back of that, what would you say are sort of like the main obstacles that are preventing effective implementation of some of these policies that could, drive productivity in Nigeria?
Right,
you just mentioned one. So
So I'll begin with a point that we've mentioned here repeatedly. Again, that policy process matters a lot, right? Because one of the points that has been echoed here by my colleagues has to do with the level of ownership of people to whatever policy that the government is making or driving or pushing. And there cannot be ownership if there is no participation. Yeah, it's the reason a lot of policies die out when the particular administration is out of office, right? Because the people remain, even though you're not in office. But if the people didn't have a say or didn't have adequate input into what you're pushing forward, then when you go, it goes with you. I mean, I was trying to implement a project some weeks back or some months ago with the Lagos State Ministry of Physical Planning and Development and Urban Development. And they actually have an app, a mobile app, that's supposed to help citizens of Lagos to track buildings. You hear the case of building collapse all around, right? So there's an app existing that an average citizen in Lagos can look at a particular building going on in his neighborhood or a neighborhood and then verify whether this building actually has gotten a permit. Oh, wow. Yes, there is.
Is it active?
Now, that's the question, right?
Okay.
So this app was launched back in 2022 or thereabout. But we found out when we went to the office that the current administration in that office inherited the app. And they do not see it as their own.
Yeah.
So while the app exists, it's practically dead. Nothing is happening to it, right? So it's the challenge, right? That's a good quote-unquote strategy towards implementing a policy that would help the nation. But because there's no adequate ownership, right? A vision, like we mentioned earlier, that transcends the individual. So it becomes a problem. So that's one major, I mean, or like a bottleneck, right? That influences or negatively impacts the implementation of policy. There are other points, but I'll let my colleagues mention.
Thank you very much for that, Femi. Ms. Chidima, do you have anything to add to that?
Speaking about the points of continuity, I think that's a critical aspect. And it cannot be just the leaders that take ownership of it. It has to be the people. Like you say, the people remain when, there's a change in government. Now we're talking about a 6-year term versus a 4-year term, a single term. So meaning maybe in 6 years or maybe 10 years, depending on if this bill goes through, we will have maybe another political party. So again, you're non-partisan, you're APC, I'm an obedient. If we have ownership as people, as opposed to as political parties, then maybe the good policies that this administration is trying to bring to bear, 10 years is a long time. So, I mean, by then, we will see some of these things come to fruition. So some of these good ones will remain because we've adopted it. So it needs to be the people that adopt it. And like you say, there's no other way but, first of all, people need to know about them. Again, National Orientation Agency, it's a real, putting the spotlight on the National Orientation Agency. But that also means that they have to be funded. I've heard that the reason why the National Orientation Agency doesn't work is because they're not funded at all. So they have to be funded. And
not at all. They have paucity of funds.
Paucity of funds, yeah.
But then you can't be creative with it. You can really be creative with it and get funds.
I think another important point to mention, if you just want to weigh in quickly here, has to do with, and again, it has a lot to do with the people. The truth again is this: there is very little trust by the citizens in considering the government, right? Generally, and until that trust issue is fixed,
I guess I want to ask how we can fix that, but then we're going to continue to
have. We're going to continue to have major issues around policy implementation in this country, and you can't really blame the people, right? Because there's been repeated. It's more like that psychological concept of learned helplessness. We've seen so much promises that never really was fulfilled or passed, and even if they were fulfilled, there is no adequate communication to show that indeed it actually has been fulfilled. So accountability in governance matters a lot. The tone at the top matters a lot. Modeling matters a lot.
Agreed.
When these things, transparency matters a great deal. When these things are there at the forefront and any administration demonstrates that, yes, we're particular about this thing, integrity matters a great deal, then you begin to fix the problem of trust. And once you begin to fix the problem of trust, it's a social contract issue. And trust is the basis of every social contract, really. And if that is not fixed, let me just leave it there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Femi. So just to bring it...
based on I think the success of any political system is based on the policy and how it's been implemented. And I think one of the problems we have also is political rascality. You see an individual or let's say an appointee of government saddled with the responsibility of ensuring the policy, and the person begins to play God. You understand? I wouldn't want to dwell much on that. And of course, another thing is lack of needs assessment. just like you rightly said, it might be a fantastic policy. Execution is key. As a management consultant, there's something. It's not just about strategy. You can sit down, talk about the planning, but then it's about execution. If you miss it during the execution stage, no matter whatever you have planned, you've mixed it. So then when there is no adequate needs assessment, then the execution will be faulty. Then another thing that causes some of our problem we have with all this policy implementation is also ethnicity. Because you see, as good as we have it, it has also become our bane, the diversity in our culture and our ethnicity. And I think if we, most especially the upcoming generation, because I think it's even getting worse in our own generation than it was in that of our fathers, if we don't nip this on the bud and quickly, as fast as possible, try to work together as one Nigeria, try to see what happened in Rwanda, try to see what's happening with Singapore, and see that we are Nigerian first before, you want to say Amiibo, Hausa, or whatever ethnicity you want to claim. Because some of these things also affect policy implementation. Because you see an average, I don't want to go this road, but then you see an average cattle rearer will say, I can, take my cattle to anywhere to breed. I can, there must be some form of intentionality and also respect for people. So it also helps in all of this policy implementation, because those implementing this policy or those formulating this policy, they put that at the back of their mind before coming up with this policy. So, but then if the execution is faulty, there's nothing we can do as a nation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olufemi.
I can see the word you're looking for is the rule of law.
Yes, upholding the rule of law. Yes, definitely. So thank you very much. In bringing our conversation to a close, I'm going to throw a question to the whole panel. Do you think declaring an immediate state of emergency in the country today will do anything in helping us address the low level of productivity we have in the country today? If not, why?
Obafemi Awolowo said, education should be taken as a state of emergency, second to war. So, and Femi also rightly opined that education, we are talking about the bedrock of productivity, education, insecurity. So, this government has declared state of emergency in the agricultural sector. Yeah, we've not begun to see the result, but we need to see the result, because nobody is interested in the rhetorics, the same line, the same, we need to see the result. So, declaring state of emergency in some specific sector, security, agriculture, education, you see those sectors are very, very important. Because why will an investor want to come to a volatile country? And if you looked at it, let me just tell you this, and we're doing fine. See, as a result of subsidy removal, we are doing fine, because our importation of the fragment of crude oil have reduced by 50%. You understand? So which means we're doing fine, and we are really doing fine also with our gas. It has to do with the right policy. Like I said, the body language of the commander-in-chief. If you are the commander-in-chief, you must be able to command chiefly. So state of emergency in education, agriculture, security, then just find one other sector that, for example, I wanted to say this, and this is not just to praise Dr. Obi, but then just to establish that some of the policies she initiated in 2005 or thereabout in solid mineral are part of the pathway Fayemi followed, and Dr. Dele Alake is following now, whereby now that we now have gold bars that we can take to the London Stock Exchange to have adequate resources for also diversification from oil and gas. It's also a very beautiful, so if you can declare state of emergency in those areas, solid mineral, education, the security sector, insecurity, then agric, then I think we're ready to go as a nation. In the next 2-3 years, we should begin to see the dividend of the renewed hope agenda.
For me,
sorry, listen, I have something to say when you're done.
Okay, fine. So I would say that, first of all, 2 to 3 years for me is really quite too optimistic.
I'm an incredible optimist.
Yeah, I'm an optimist, but I do think that some of the the truth is this. One of the challenges we have in this country as well, as an aside, is we fail to realize that a lot of the problems that administrations come into are inherited.
Yes, correct.
And sometimes what has taken 15 years, 18, some are inherited even as far back as particular or previous republic. So it's going to take some time. So while I'm hopeful rather, I don't see so much transformation happening over a 2-3 year period, quite frankly. Nonetheless, for me, whether you declare state of emergency or you declare a free for all or whatever. I'm not so much particular about that, honestly, because you can have a declaration, and like you said, declarations are very great.
Yeah, but nothing happens.
And then you don't just see so much traction. I think what is important for me is a demonstrated commitment, which is reflected in traction per time, right? Measurable traction and measurable progress over time. So whether the government declares state of emergency on low productivity or not, I'm not so much particular about that. The question is that, is there a clear roadmap that is communicated to everyone? Are all the involved stakeholders on the table, right? Is there a clear line of sight in terms of investments and changes that are required? And then are there measurable milestones that people can hold the government accountable to? If you put those things in place without even actually coming out with all guns blazing in state of emergency, then you're actually making progress, right? So that's my take around that.
Thank you very much,
great
Mr. Femi. Finally, let's get your final thoughts on this.
We've been declaring states of emergencies on plenty of
Different
sectors.
things,
In fact, with this definition, there's been a state of emergency on the agriculture sector
Yes.
for the last 9 years.
Yes.
There's been a state of emergency on many different sectors. Maybe we're not measuring it. Maybe that's why we don't know whether or not we're growing. As we say at the SPPG, bring data. Let's know whether or not.
In God we trust.
Everyone else bring data.
Everyone else bring your data, yeah?
But having said that, what I think we need a state of emergency on is on the rule of law. And a sense of justice, really, in the system. So, again, we have these fantastic policies in all these sectors that we've mentioned. Implementation is difficult because anyone can do whatever they want and get away with it. From the top to the bottom, everyone can do whatever they want and get away with it. If you have enough money, if you have enough influence, if you're high up enough on the food chain, you can pretty much get away with anything.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where we need to begin with this state of emergency.
Yeah.
So that the person who is in, and this is probably me shooting myself in the foot as an employer of labor, but if employers of labor, the productivity that's currently happening, don't feel properly compensated, they can go somewhere to make their case.
Yes.
And it will be heard, and then justice will be served. So that's where I think the state of emergency needs to be. And then maybe all these other things will start to fall into place.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olufemi, Ms. Chidima, and Mr. Femi for sharing your thoughts today with us on how Nigeria can become a productive nation, hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years. Being optimistic.
No. See, it's a process. Let me come in here. I actually wanted to correct that. See, it's a process. You see, as a management consultant, in fact, one of the projects I worked on coming out of school, even from NYC, was balance scorecard. And what does it mean? What you measure grows. And if you look at this administration, they've actually set a tone. So there's somebody that she's one of the person that have direct access to Mr. President, Bala Mohammed. So you know why you haven't seen cabinet reshuffle, or you haven't? It's because even the 2024 budget has not even gotten into half implementation. So you can't hold any minister or any agency to responsibility for this 2024. So what you measure grows. So what we need to do is, by the time they begin to measure performance, so it's a process. You measure the level of productivity, you measure the human capital investment, you measure the cost, then we cannot begin to say. So saying 2-3 years, it's a process. You know, the Yoruba people will say Saturday to Amada, Friday Latimo, a Saturday that will be jolly. You know from Friday. So that is it. That's why I said 2-3 years, you already know that, okay, this administration knows what they are doing, because in the next 2 years, for real,
the administration is over.
That's what I'm saying.
But you know, we're trying to solve 30-year problems in 4 years.
That's the problem. Look at Ajakuta. Ajakuta problem has been on in the 80s.
It's true now, because we've not looked at other countries and what they've done.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have a long-term plan.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's one major thing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for your time today. This has been Beyond Political Lines. My name is Juana Johnson, your host, and we shall see you on the next episode.
So we've heard from our guests, and regardless of what party you belong to, we can all agree that Nigeria has a productivity crisis. And to address this crisis, we propose that a multifaceted approach will be needed to focus on several key areas. However, the most important area that we believe it needs to be focused on in order to address this issue is building public trust. According to the 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer, only 23% of Nigerians trust the Nigerian government. What this means is that irrespective of the policies that the government puts in place to address this productivity crisis, without rebuilding this public trust, these efforts will fail. The reality is that you need Nigerians to fix Nigeria. So how did we get here as a nation? How did Nigeria lose the trust of its people? This lack of public trust is rooted and deeply rooted in a long history of unfulfilled promises and corruption that has spread since its return to democratic rule in 1999. Each successive administration has come into power with grand promises and grand agendas. However, these promises have consistently fallen short. This cycle of unfulfilled promises has created a pattern of hope followed by disappointment in the Nigerian people, which has led to the lack of public trust that we are now seeing within the populace. Nigeria's long history of broken promises is characterized by corruption. It has been reported that Nigeria has lost at least $600 billion to corruption since its independence in 1960. As a result of this cycle of corruption, citizens have grown increasingly cynical about the government's initiatives. To rebuild this trust, we propose the government introducing the TEA framework into its governance effort. TEA stands for Transparency, Efficiency, and Accountability. Transparency involves creating systems that ensure accessibility and inclusivity of information. By creating transparent systems, we believe that the Nigerian government will be able to re-establish connections and meaningful dialogues with the citizens. Efficiency means maximizing the use of resources without compromising the human aspect of governance. We believe that by streamlining operations and reducing the cost of governance, the Nigerian government will be better placed to serve its people by focusing its resources on higher and more beneficial projects. Finally, accountability. This is usually the most challenging component of the TEA framework to achieve. And this is because it involves holding the elected officials and the citizens accountable for their actions. By ensuring that both citizens and the elected officials are held accountable for their actions, whether it results in negative or positive outcomes, we are upholding the principle that no one is above the law. This is Mandate 4's position on what needs to be done to address the low productivity crisis in Nigeria today. What do you think? We want to hear from you. To learn more about Mandate 4's position on how to solve this productivity issue in Nigeria, please visit. This has been Beyond Political Lines. My name is Wana Johnson, and we will see you on the next episode.